We find ourselves in a very unique situation in which we have not found ourselves in over 700 years. The Pope has just stepped down, and now we have a unique opportunity for Catholicism to re-engage with its religious community and with actually what is currently going on with the individuals who currently practice this religion. And what we're saying on our side of the house is that the best way to reinvigorate Catholicism, to really enable all of its members to participate in this religion, is to change how the face of this religion is being chosen. So first I'm going to present to you a model of how we see this happening, and then I'm going to first talk about the importance of the Pope and the direct link to individuals being able to access religion through him. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the changing demographic, who are those practicing Catholicism, and how these individuals are losing out and how the face of Catholicism is changing, but the traditions which hold the Pope in place are not keeping pace. So first off, we think the best way to choose the next Pope is really what comes down to the idea of this debate. If it's better for those practicing this religion to have those individuals who are practicing it choose, or keep the traditional model where the Cardinals are the ones who are appointing this individual. How we think our mechanism would work is that we would hold like a local ballot at local churches, and their congregations would be the ones to get this ballot and choose candidates from this ballot, and it would be a majority choice for the candidate who would then assume the position of Pope based on this vote. We think that the way to judge this debate is to see how it would be the best way for this religion and for the individuals practicing it to choose the face that is representing them. I'll take your clarification before I go on.
Are the popes or the pretendants going to campaign for this, or?
We think that's perfectly fine, and we actually really want them to get in touch with the individuals within their religion, as I'll talk to you secondly in my point about changing demographics. But first off, the importance of the Pope. The Pope is the ultimate power in the religion of Catholicism. It's the direct link to God. Essentially, it's a lot like God, Jesus, Pope. You see that this is the individual who then relates to the cardinals underneath, and then is able to relate to the individuals who are actually practicing this religion. You see that they're the one who gets the final call on important interpretations which dictate how you are actually able to live your life as a Catholic. We see that they have made decisions on things like you are able to cremate your body instead of having to be buried. They make statements on abortion and contraceptions and what it means to miscarry a child. They actually were the ones who had to forgive the Jews for, in their perception, of killing Jesus. And they make this sorts of ideas on homophobia. They make statements on this. And we think that these affect the everyday life of individuals who are currently practicing this religion, and they are the ones who are making the final calls. But secondly, they're also the face of this religion, the representative to the rest of the world, and the one who the individuals who are practicing this religion looked up to. They're the ones who say, when you think of Catholicism, you think of Pope Benedict and his speeches and how he's dressed when he's addressing crowds from the papacy. We think this is really important. And why is it so important? Because we want to be able, for the most Catholics, to be able to access their religion through this individual, because he is the one who's calling the shots on how they live their lives, and he's the one who is their direct connection to God. And so it's really important that they're able to feel like they can identify with him, and that he's in line with their views, and that he's making the right calls, and that he's actually going to embody the current practices and congregations of his members, because this is how these individuals access their religion and how their moral values which they lead their everyday lives are interpreted. So why don't we think that the Pope is in touch? Because that's really what I've been describing to you of how he makes all these calls, and I guess I'm kind of saying he's making them wrong. So secondly, this changing demographic, and that's why it's so important, because Catholicism is no longer a religion of the white European, and we think that's really important. We think that there are large populations in Latin America and in Africa, and these individuals are not able to be represented if a bunch of white European cardinals are actually choosing their candidate. We think that these populations aren't going to be best, or may not be best represented by someone who is chosen by these Italians and Polish and German individuals. And we see that currently there are candidates who embody this new demographic, and we think that they're facing unnecessarily challenges. We see that there's a Latin American candidate. We see that there's an African African candidate who is actually pro-protected sex to fight for the AIDS problem in Africa. And we think that these candidates deserve an equal interpretation or qualification as the other ones and deserve an equal chance. And we think that if these candidates actually have to engage with people instead of like currently in the Cardinal tradition where they get to choose based on what they think, based on their traditions, not the traditions of the entire population, we think that these candidates should actually have to pay attention to the new ways that Catholicism is actually being lived and the new problems of the new generation that they have to face. Because the old traditions didn't have to face things like birth control. They didn't have to face things like safe abortions. They didn't have to face things like the growing change and acceptance of homosexuals in their society. We think it's really problematic if they're interpreted in old text ways. But before I go on,
considering as the legitimacy of the Church, of the Pope, comes through his election through divine providence, how will the new Pope have any kind of legitimacy to do any kind of good for the congregation of Catholicism?
We think it's a lot like how in Judaism they recently allowed female rabbis to actually participate and become like rabbis. We think that it hasn't actually made Judaism any less meaningful, and it hasn't prevented these individuals from accessing religion due to this new interpretation. Religion can be changed, and it can be interpreted based on the changing times. We think in the same way the Pope will actually have more legitimacy if he is seen to actually embody the current views of these members, and that he will still obtain the divine post that he is supposed to be taking, but we don't think he needs cardinals to be the ones to actually give him this power. So we think that the second problem that we see with this changing demographic is we have this younger generation. We have priests who want to be able to marry their daughters in their churches, but become excommunicated because the Pope says that they are not able to do this, and because the cardinals are making these decisions that they're not able to do this. And this is a shift in what Catholicism means to the individual. But because of the way that the cardinals are not likely to represent all of these individuals, because they are from the white European older generation, they also don't have any need to engage with these individuals. And we think this is because this harms the individual's ability to access religion and also harms religion's ability to access individuals. This is not only harmful for Catholicism to be able to engage with its members, but it's harmful for its members who are not able to engage in religion in a meaningful way. And what we say for you from the government side of the bench is that tradition is standing in the way of the access of religion of these individuals. And what we're saying is we don't need the most progressive candidate to win on our side of the house. What we do need to be able to give feedback mechanisms, and we need to be able to provide these individuals with the best way to access their religion. So thank you.
We think that the most important thing that Prop pointed out today is that, yes, the Pope is perceived as the direct representative of God on this earth, whereas his whole influence and authority to the people lies. We think that at the moment where the Pope is chosen by the people through a vote, by a majority of people, that is where he becomes simply a political figure and loses all of that religious connotations that he has in the church, loses all of his authority, and becomes meaningless as nothing more than just a political leader of a state and of some other cardinals, nothing to the religion in itself. We see that if we are to look at this debate from the point of view of the Catholic Church and of the Catholic religion, we think that is very problematic and it's a terrible idea. So what am I going to talk to you about in my case? First of all, I'm going to talk to you why it's very important that the Pope has certain qualities that should be taken into account, and how people, secondly, are a lot more likely to look at the wrong qualities in a person when they elect them. And we can see this in the way that people elect other leaders in political campaigns and so on and so forth. No, thank you. I'm going to talk about why politicizing this whole process is such a problematic thing, and how this will have negative implications on the Catholic Church, on the believers, and on the society at large. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about why it's so bad that the Pope is going to lose all of his authority, and why we think that a lot less change is prone to happen. First of all, some rebuttal. First of all, they say, well, the Pope is a representative of the Catholic Church and of the believers across the world. They feel that they can identify with him and believe in their cause. We think that all of this will change. Why? First of all, he will no longer be perceived as a representative of God, chosen by the people who are in a direct relation with God, as the cardinals are, being priests themselves. Cardinals are seen as somewhat being in direct connection with God. So when the cardinals choose the Pope, this is what gives him the authority of being the representative of God. We think that he would no longer be perceived this way. He will just be perceived as the candidate who managed to gather the most votes around his people. Secondly, we think that people are not going to trust him anymore that much, and are not going to identify with him, particularly because he's just the one who managed to gain the most ballots. And we think that it's possible that a very large part of the population didn't even vote for that candidate, and they will not feel represented by the one who is eventually won all of this election. They would not trust him, not see him as their leader. And this direct link that exists from a spiritual leader to the people who receive guidance from him will be lost. Then they say, no, thank you. That, well, you know, we should offer an equal chance to all candidates, and there are unnecessary challenges. We see that, no, when the last Pope was elected, actually there was a very, very strong discussion, and it was a very high probability that a South American cardinal was elected. So we see that as long as there are cardinals from all over the world in their gathering, all of them have chances. And what we think is very important is when they elect a cardinal, they can interact with each other. They know what the views of each cardinal are, they know what they stand for, and they can better understand what is best for that church rather than what people can perceive from the outside. So moreover, we don't think we're giving them equal chances. It's just going to matter which part of the globe votes more. Then they told us about engagement with the church. No. We see that there's still engagement of people with their priests at the moment, because all of the cardinals are priests as well. They hold masses, they enter in contact directly with the people. We think, moreover, that it's still the people that believe at the moment and that go to church at the moment who are going to vote. So we know where are we going to appeal to a different public, because it's still the very same people that are at the moment engage with the church that are going to make that call. So first of all, we think that it's very important for a pope to have certain qualities. He needs to be a very balanced person. He needs to be an educated person. He needs to be one that is not just a very high spiritual and very high dignity, but also a person that is very good with interacting with the other leaders in the world. And we admit that the pope can have a political role in this world. We think that when people make a choice based on their campaign, they're a lot more likely to take into consideration a lot of things that shouldn't matter when electing a spiritual leader. They're going to choose the person that is most charismatic. They're going to choose the person who made his campaign the best and who talked to the most people and who had the most money, for instance, to campaign for this cause. We think that the ones that the people are going to choose isn't going to be the best to represent them. And at the moment where a person who isn't qualified, who isn't a person that should lead the Catholic Church is elected, the whole authority and the image of the Catholic Church is destroyed to the whole of the world. Sorry, and I'll take closing.
So why do you assume that people have conflict of interest when they vote for the Pope, but cardinals have no conflict of interest whatsoever?
What I've explained to you is that cardinals can better relate to those, and when they vote, they take into account the interest of the Catholic Church and the interest of the people themselves, because cardinals relate to the peoples as having their own congregation. What we're telling you is not about a conflict of interest, but about taking into account different elements which should not have anything to do with a political leader. And let's look at the kind of political choices that people make at the moment. Let's look at what kind of people they vote. Let's look at how Silvio Berlusconi was just elected and received a large number of votes in Italy. It's clear that people do not make rational decisions and do not choose their best people. Why we think that this politicizing of the whole process will make that not the best people will be elected and rational choices will not be made, which will harm the whole image of the Catholic Church and thus the believers. Why we think it's so problematic that it's going to lose authority? First of all, as I've explained to you, he will be seen as a political figure. Moreover, he will only be chosen by some of the people. To all of the other people, he will not be perceived as a representative, and thus he cannot be perceived as a representative of God, since they obviously believed it should be a unique individual that God chosen. It will just be the person that received the most votes. Why is this? First of all, we think that for the people this is very bad, because what they need and what they expect from the Pope is guidance and is stability, which cannot be offered when they don't trust that very person, and when they challenge the fact that he should even be leading them in the first place. We think that it's a lot less likely for the Pope to be a change for good if he were to have progressive views, particularly because his mere holding that post is challenged by a large number of people. So for all these reasons, because it's very important for the Pope to have certain qualities that people may ignore, because it will all be seen as a political process and authority will be lost, we think it's very detrimental for the Church and for believers at whole. I'm very proud to oppose.
As a Tibetan Buddhist, when the Dalai Lama announced he was considering having an apprentice or someone under him be the next Dalai Lama, and not the process that hundreds of years of reincarnation had decided on, I did not lose my faith. Rather, I realized that the leader in charge was making a decision that impacted my religious view and my religious spirituality. We think the same way Catholics look up to the Pope, in the same way a Tibetan Buddhist looks up to the Dalai Lama, that decision will not be changed on the process, but rather on that person themselves. And we're going to explain to you why this process, in fact, will get the best person, and why that's the most important bit. Now, what do we get from opening opposition? And I'm going to explain to you the real inherent contradiction we get from their speech. What they tell us is there's certain qualities that a pope needs. They say things like he needs to be balanced, he needs to be educated, and he needs to be spiritual. But they also tell us that because cardinals have a connection spiritually with God that's closer than the average person, that is why that decision is best. So is it that the cardinals are deciding based on this higher power telling them, or is it because there are certain qualities that someone can have that makes them a good pope? We think that when they assert that contradiction, they lose the power of their argument. And they have never explained to us why, let's say there is this election, this referendum, why people won't use those two barometers on what a good pope is versus what a good cardinal can decide. We think someone may say, I spiritually feel that this is the best pope. They may also say, I feel that the best pope is someone from my country, from my area. We don't think that's an illegitimate choice. They haven't explained to us why it's an illegitimate choice. Now, the biggest point they tell us is, in fact, that when you make this a political process, you damage the power of the Pope.
Well, I hate to tell them, but it's already a very political process. It's very political on whether or not you're Polish or you're German, or if possibly you had something happen in your younger days when you were a priest or like moving up into cardinal positions. It's exceptionally political. The difference is those internal politics that have affected Catholicism so poorly in modern society are now becoming external. We think that that externality of where people can make a decision that possibly is political does not lessen the power of the Pope, but in fact re-engages people and makes them feel connected to that hierarchy, connected to the fact that they can have control of their religion. Now, what I'm going to do for you today is talk about what will people vote for, kind of what I've talked about in my intro, and then why even when you have politics, it doesn't necessarily like damage the process, like damage the influence of the Pope. Really add on to what Serena tells you about how the best decisions are made by the Pope when people feel like the best decisions are made when the Pope is someone who represents them religiously. But before I get into that, I just want to discuss exactly where the Pope's power comes from and like the interpretation of how a Pope gains power. There's nothing in the Bible that specifically says how a Pope must be chosen. And we think even if there was a very specific line that says the Pope must be picked by 12 cardinals on this day every single year, that still, for most times, would be up for interpretation. And we think that that type of interpretation on religion is not only something that the Pope himself has been doing for hundreds of years, re-examining even things like forgiving Jewish people for the execution of Jesus. We think that those types of grave reinterpretations did not change if people agreed with the Pope or felt his power was there. In fact, gave them a new perspective on their religion. But the thing is that basically when Jesus appointed St. Peter to be like the key bearer of his church, he never said, and you must have your person after you be picked in a certain way. So we think that even in their own religious doctrine itself, there is a matter of reinterpretation that's up for question. But go ahead.
When the Pope is chosen by the cardinals, the people accept him as a figure of authority because the cardinals themselves are figures of authority. Now it will be simply a person chosen by other common people just like them.
When you look at Catholicism, the access to religion, while based particularly on authority, we think is not good for the religion. That is what Serena and I have stood for in this debate. We think when you give the common person, the common lay churchgoer, the ability to access God better because they don't need to be in a position of power, is actually far better for Catholicism in the long run. That was Serena's speech if you were listening. So what exactly do we think people will vote for? And we think we get the type of rhetoric that First Stop gives us. Is it things like the qualities the people inhabits, like where they're from, or is it something like religious divine spirituality? And we think it can be both. In fact, we think that when you see someone's qualities like being near you, you might spiritually or like a non-existentialist way feel that that quality was given to them divinely. Like the reason I'm a good speaker is because God gave me this ability. We think that those types, maybe, I don't know, but when you look at those types of divine interpretations, we think that the power isn't lost when the person choosing feels that they have a divine connection to God. Now, I think the strongest argument we get from First Op is since there is some people that won't get the person they pick, like the person they divinely felt connected to, then they won't trust that Pope. We think that not only does that happen in the status quo where people really push for a certain Pope, they feel like this cardinal should be elected or should be given power now, is actually mitigated in our status quo, because now you don't get a say at all, and we think that when you get a say, you in fact feel like your voice is possibly being heard. And all the rhetoric we get from Serena about how there's countries that don't have access to this, they've never had someone from their country elected or given power, that those people, even just having a vote, will make them feel like they are a part of the religion more, that they actually care about the religion more. We haven't seen a Pope visit places in Latin America for something like 25 years. So the fact that these people we think this type of campaigning is exceptionally good, because you have to have them go in and explain their characteristics to these people, and that will in fact make them feel very good about their religion, and basically as Catholics feel like they can now access eternal happiness and they can now access eternal afterlife. So we think that's very good because you're more connected. So the reason what we've weighed for you today outweighs what First Op gives you is we've told you not only do you not lose the power because you have, you don't lose the power of the Pope because of the type of status quo we have now, but you give the power to the people, and in fact, why that is more legitimate and better for the Catholic Church, because it gives people who are churchgoers better access to their religion. They feel that they have a closer divine connection. It keeps people longer if you feel you have a closer divine connection. Like if you can speak to God directly, which many Catholics believe that you can like go and speak to him, like pray to him, that you will feel more connected. And we've also explained to you why, in fact, this hierarchy is not in place because there's it needs to be in place because of constant reinterpretation done by the Catholic Church. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the floor. When you give power to the people, what you're actually doing is take away from all that sacred element that the Church and the Pope has today. It's not about having somebody to guide the entire Christian community. It's about having a say in all the religious matters, and it makes this whole process a lot more political, and I'm going to explain you the harms later on. But another point here is that what they've said, that, you know, nowadays it's also political, it's extremely politicized. Firstly, we reject that, specifically because you don't have this implication of the people. But secondly, even if we would concede that it is, what's important to understand is that it is not seen as politicized by the people, and that's what makes the Pope as a figure of authority, because it's seen as something superior, higher than all the political institutions they have today and they resent. So I'm going to have 4 points in my speech. I'm going to tell you about the difference the Pope makes and why it's important to have the right Pope in place. I'm going to talk about the importance of authority, about representation, and about the fact that this measure will not only hurt the Pope, as Joanna has explained to you, and his authority, but also the Catholic Church as a whole. Now, they have also considered that the Pope is a moral and superior authority. He's there for guidance. He's there to give us a basic set of rules in order for us to go on with our spiritual life. Now, where does his power come from and his authority? It comes from that specific process of being elected and being seen as elected by the people, by the best of the people, the Cardinals, who are seen as the second in place by the Pope being the representative of God. So when these Cardinals choose a Pope, people believe that he is the best person who was possibly to be there at that moment, and the best one to give them moral and spiritual guidance. And that's why they accept him. That's why they relate to him, because of their common beliefs, because of his spiritual and moral superiority they believe in. And we believe that there's absolutely no problem today in the masses when relating to the Pope. We believe that this is where this relationship comes from. Now, they told us that we have never actually given them proof of why people couldn't make a rational choice. Why couldn't they take into account those 2 parameters? Because even when we give people facts, like, you know, I'm left-wing, I'm right-wing, in the past I screw up when you chose me, I promise you I'm going to do so much better, and I'm going to give you huge salaries, even if our economy is down, people still make stupid decisions because they are not rational. The masses are purely emotional. If I appeal to the people as a politician because I'm nice and I seem like a nice person, I'm more likely to get elected. And Joanna has told you that it's crucial to have a Pope with all those qualities. It's important to have a balanced person that will take all of the views into account. It's important to have somebody of moral superiority that would be able to strive for change and to better represent the Catholic Church. And we believe that I have just just proved to you that people won't be able to make this rational change, but the Cardinals, who are part of the system, no, not yet, thank you, are the ones who are best in place to take this decision. Now, no, and before my second point, their big problem was that, people cannot access religion through the Pope. I've already explained that the relationship between the people and the Pope comes from the one, authority, second, the belief that he's the best to guide their spiritual life. Because religion is so complex and of so abstract nature, it's important to have some stability in that area. Somebody to give you a basic set of guidelines in order for you to then quest on your own. And they want somebody to give them these guidelines. And because he's seen as the representative of God and chosen by the best people, people relate and respect him and value his opinions. Now, moving on to the importance of authority. We believe that, no, not yet, we believe that authority brings unity. It's important throughout the entire Catholic community to have unity and to have a common set of values. If we make this a democratic process, people will see that now other people can choose from them. It will make it less sacred. It will make it as just another state actor that does not have that moral superiority that religion makes itself distinct of. We believe that people now do trust other people to make the best decisions because they are seen of moral superiority. I'm talking about the Cardinals. But when you give it to the people, it's just not as divine anymore. It's just about having a say, as I've explained later on. And before the third point, second.
Why can God express his will better through cardinals than he can do through normal common people?
Because the Cardinals are the people who have studied and prepared in this area more. The masses are the ones which need guidance because they cannot understand religion and they are very, very subjective and emotional. Now, very quickly about representation. Their big problem was the fact that you cannot have popes from everywhere. We believe that, as Joanna has explained to you, you give them less of an equality of opportunities when you are allowing the masses to vote because they are purely emotional. Secondly, as there is a Congress of Cardinals, everybody has a fair chance of winning. Now, why we believe that this is worst for the church? Because, as I said, it brings it at the same level with state institutions. It loses authority, it loses the moral high ground it nowadays have in society. And we believe that it takes away its power and its spiritual superiority. So we believe that at the end of the day, what you're having is that you're bringing this political process into an area that is purely spiritual and needs to have the unity and the authority we've been talking about in our speeches. We believe that it's important for people to trust that that set of guidelines is the best that they can follow, and it's important for them to be able to be secure when it comes to this kind of, let's say, decisions. So at the end of the day, we see that you're making it more secular, and you're giving it less authority, and that's bad for the people and for the church as a whole. And for all these reasons, please oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, first, government has done a decent job in explaining you why there are concrete examples and concrete benefits and worldly benefits in the relation between the Catholic Church and the Catholic community when the Catholic community elects the Pope. I will talk about why there is not only reason, but why Catholic theology dictates that we should abolish the conclave and have the Catholic community choose the Pope. But before I do that, I talk about first opposition. Like, they say the masses are emotional and therefore they shouldn't have a say. First of all, That's a bit against anything that this side would usually argue. But beside that, we don't see what that practically impacts on. The Pope doesn't make any promises on social politics. He doesn't make promises about giving money to the population that supports him most. We don't see why that has any practical problematic implications in the first place. But what we rather say is, about their point about cardinals to choose because they know better about religion and about belief, is that they fundamentally disrespect the idea that stands behind the Pope and how he is indirectly chosen by God. Because religion and belief is only in the second place about knowledge. In the first place, it is about believing and devotion, and this is what they do not acknowledge. And they haven't given a sufficient answer to the question why God can express his will better through cardinals, because they have read the Bible in more depth, rather than having people choosing it that haven't read the Bible but still are Catholic. I don't get that point. So Catholic theology, what is the Pope in the first place? I have to take on that firstly. Okay, we have heard that it is a successor of St. Pete and that he represents Jesus Christ and God on earth. But how comes about the idea of the conclave? Why do the cardinals have to choose it? It is because God has agreed with mankind that he will not anymore indirectly interfere with the fate of man. After the Great Flood, he said, "Man, you are responsible for your own fate. I will only guide you. I will not anymore force you to do what I think is best, and I will not tell you what to do. I've given you the free will. I will tell you what is right and what is wrong, but you have to decide on your own whether you do the right thing or the bad thing." So that is a problem that he has. So he only can express his will indirectly. And what we say is that in the past there were problems, but these problems has become so predominant that we have to change something now. So the idea that through the cardinals, God expresses his will. So he tells the cardinals indirectly that the person they should choose. That is the idea that the Catholic Church internally has. And so that is what we should aim at explaining. So but the problem here is that cardinals nowadays probably relate more to corrupt banks and money washing and the mafia than to God themselves. And they haven't, they can say shame all the way down, but that is what all the WikiLeaks affair is about and what the problems of the Vatican nowadays is. Because the cardinals have become people that have power and that they have a certain interest, right? So when they say people from South America will vote for a South American Pope, they have not explained us why that conflict of interest is worse than the conflict of interest of a cardinal from South America who will actually increase its own power when a Pope that comes from South America will focus more on South America. Like the Youth Day, the International Catholic Youth Day, held in Germany, just incidentally, 1 year after a German Pope was chosen by, among others, German cardinals, right? So there wasn't any conflict of interest that the cardinals increased their own power and secured the worldly power that they have gained. So when God gave the free will to cardinals and told them who they should vote for in the conclave, he didn't expect that the cardinals may have to make a trade-off between their own power interests and their own influence in the Vatican and reflecting the will of God. I take second.
If all people are equally close to God, then why do we need the Pope in the first place?
So again, the last sentence.
If all people are equally close to God, then why do we need a Pope in the first place?
I don't say that all people are equally close to God. I say that God can express his will through common people in a better way than he can express it through cardinals whose interest is maintaining and increasing their own influence and power in the Vatican. So people have sought and studied God on a personal level. They have engaged in religion and belief on a personal level, rather than the cardinals who have engaged and studied religion always in relation to their position in an organization like the Catholic Church. Their belief was all the time closely interrelated with their power they had in the Catholic Church and through their career that they're closely related to their belief. So that is why we say people are less corrupted when it comes to belief by self-interests. Rather, we say that God can more easily influence common people to express his will rather than cardinals can do first.
Firstly, they are priests, not politicians. Secondly, don't you think it's more important that people perceive them as being closer to God than themselves, and that gives the Pope authority?
No. It is actually the reason that he is I've explained to you that on grounds of Catholic theology and the fact that the Pope should reflect God's will, that when God can better influence and express his will through common people, we should rather listen to common people rather than to cardinals if God can't express his will through cardinals anymore. And because the Pope is no politician, their own point falls that people and the masses are emotional and will elect the politician that makes the biggest promises. We don't see how their argument destroys our argument rather than their own, okay? So they say people will draw the focus onto their region. We say, fine, they haven't explained us why cardinals don't, right? So their case is still worse than ours. Well, we say, if you want to reflect Catholic theology and really do what God's intent, you have to ask Catholic church-going believers rather than power people.
Two seconds. Yes? Madam Speaker, thank you for the floor. There's something that I just need to rectify in this debate. The Pope is not the representative of the Catholic flock. He's the representative of God on earth. See, something that might be very, very hard to see, although I do think that the previous speaker spoke about this, is that it's hard to see in this secular stronghold, once the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, is that the majority of the people who would be voting in this election, the church-going Catholics, are people who truly believe in God. They believe in the literal truth of the Bible. They believe in the sanctity of the Pope, which is why he's called His Holiness the Pope, and they so believe in the sanctity of his election protests. Now, the problem with proposition that, like the previous speaker, was a really nice speech, but it was not a Catholic speech. It was a Protestant speech. The things that we've heard from side proposition are things that we can find back in the 95 Theses that Martin Luther pitched on the church door of Württemberg in 1513. All right. So, and I'm going to show you why. Now, what I do want to crystallize to you, honorable judges, is that there's an agreement here that the Pope has the ability to do good, right? And that's so what we should judge this debate on is in what gives the Pope more legitimacy, and in basically what increases his ability to do good. Now, what do we say specifically is beneficial in the role of the Pope and in the role of the Church as a whole? Is that it gives a communal identity to the people, something to bind around and believe in. That gives people hope for a better future and for a hereafter, and that it teaches kindness to other people, turning the other cheek, and all of that jazz. All right. So now, what I'm going to bring to you now is two things. First of all, why the Pope needs to be perceived as holy in order to be able to do good, and why this is going to demean that. And secondly, why the Catholic Church needs to remain centralized and monolithic in order to be able to do good, and why this decentralizes the religion. First of all, just a really quick rebuttal. So, As my partner brought, if the previous speaker says that people can make decisions better than those in power in the church, then he's basically delegitimizing the entire hierarchy and institution of the church. And in that case, I would advise him to leave the Catholic Church and go to any of the Protestant churches. However, what happened with those Protestant churches? They're not one. They became the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, the Calvinists, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Anabaptists, the Seventh-day Adventists, etc. And why? Because they're not a centralized thing that believe in one centralized institution. Please sit down. Now, you see what happens is that when the Cardinals made a what we call split decision in 1378 on the next pope, that led to the great schism of the West, when 2 and later 3 popes ruled, which led to a complete loss of belief in the Catholic Church and its institutions, which led directly to the Hussite revolts in nearby Bohemia, which led to the Protestant Reformation. Because once people see that there is once people see this is not that there are tears in the seamless cloth of Christ, and it's not a consensus of God's decision, then there is no authority in this anymore. And I will get back to this into my points. And that actually kind of really nicely rebuts this entire speech nicely. Okay, so on holiness. So how do people see the Pope? In brief, according to the believers, right? Because these are the electorate who are going to be in this election. So St. Peter was given the keys to heaven and became the first bishop of Rome. It was ordained that his successors would be the interlocutors between God and man. And it's something which is extremely important in Catholicism, that it's not your personal relationship with God, that you can't personally interpret God's will, but you need an interlocutor between you. That is what differentiates Catholicism from Protestantism. Okay? Now, so that God needs someone to explain his will to his flock. So this is why there's a big Rome centricism in the church, in the church. And why so he's chosen in a room in St. Peter's Basilica, because it's believed that the power of the Holy Spirit and divine providence is present in that room, and so that divinely leads the cardinals to make the right decision of who God wants as his representative on earth. Now, so this is what gives him his legitimacy in the first place. Now, see, according to the Catholic Church, when the Pope speaks from his chair, when he sits ex cathedra, he speaks with God's will, and he is infallible. The only reason that he can do this is because his selection process, because he is the person that God wanted there in the first place. So this is what gives him the legitimacy in the eyes of his believers. So what we see here is there's a great power in rituals and there's a great power in tradition. See, if the Pope were to show up to work with all stars and jeans and some kind of punk band shirt, no one would take him seriously. But it's the fact that he is wearing his white robes and his white hat and his orb and his scepter and a scepter that grants him this legitimacy because of tradition and because of ritual. The fact that people pray X times a day, and the fact that the people come to Rome and do so and make pilgrimages is what binds these people together in the common identity that is the Roman Catholic Church. So the fact that when the Pope dies, the cardinals come together and people flock to St. Peter's Square and wait for the white smoke to come out to come out of the chimney. This is what gives the Pope legitimacy. This is what creates the feeling that the Pope is someone special who you should listen to. This is what allows him to do good. I'll take opening.
So if the Pope loses some authority, but individuals are better able to access the morals...
Okay, sit down. I got you. Please sit down. Okay? So what we say that he won't have any authority or any authority anymore to do good things, such as for instance, when the Pope called the IRA to lay down their arms, this was a landmark moment in Northern Ireland. Why? Because they believed that he was their spiritual leader, because he was holy, because this was God's will. When the Pope contains interfaith dialogue and tells people to be tolerant to other religions, this is something that they do because he is their leader. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the centralism. So the Roman Catholic Church needs the decentralism in order to be able to dispatch their messages. According to religious reasons, because God needs one representative on earth, and he's the person best able to represent his will. So why does this decentralize the church? Because it gives power to local priests who can now influence their flocks on who the right person is to vote for, because they believe in them as their spiritual leaders. So these election campaigns are going to pit priests against priests, and you're not going to get a consensus decision. So now you're going to see a split decision on this, which means that it's no longer truly God's representative, not a Rome-centric one, not a holy decision, therefore not a legitimate one. So the Pope has no ability to influence his flock to do all of the good things that we spoke about. So it becomes a Protestant religion which will splinter like all the other Protestant religions do. So therefore, we beg you to please oppose. Keep the holiness of the Pope.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the son of a Methodist preacher man. I'm working for a Catholic university, and I'm very happy to debate this debate with people and believers from all other churches, because it tells us something. It tells us this is important. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about the interaction between believers and the church, and about the interaction between God and the believers. And we think that the proposition side can prove you on both sides that the interaction improves when we have a referendum over the Pope. First Prop said there are no new needs of believers in many countries that are not well represented in cardinals. There are way many European cardinals, and they are South American or African, although there are much more people living there. And they have other needs than Europeans, but Europeans have the higher power within the cardinals, and therefore nothing is changing. So the problems of a changing demography in the church is not well addressed, and that was the basic point of them. And then the first op said, well, basically a pope is a politician and he leads a lot of management competences, and they said the interaction of the relationship between the pope and the believers should not be a theological one, but it should be a political one. And that's something we oppose. We say maybe it is a political one, but it should not be a political one, it should be a religious one. And you said the votes of the people electing him will be populistic. They will vote in own self-interest. Well, basically what you're implicitly saying is that you think that democracy is a bad thing and does not work. Even if you're not a religious person, you should say that democracy basically works quite well when we look through the world where people have a good standard of living. So that's it. And you said the Cardinals should choose because they are better equipped, because they have a better education. Simply, you put it, because they are the better Christians. And that is simply not true. That is contradictory to the basic concept of a church that is laid down in the Bible and that Jesus told us. The concept of the church is that the church consists of all people believing in God and coming together to have services. It's not that there is an implicit hierarchy in it. Of course, it says that there is a successor of Jesus on earth, which was Peter and which is the Pope, but nowhere in the Bible anybody tells us something about cardinals voting this guy. So basically, every member should equal weight. Peter is the key. The Pope should be somehow chosen, and he has the mandate from the Bible. The Cardinals have not, and therefore they shouldn't vote him. I take your point.
Among the Catholic Church, there are such a thing as priests. Presumably they are in a position of being closer to God than regular people, since they are the ones to preach the people. Cardinals are the, let's say, best priests.
I get your point. This is because you need somebody who tells the people what is standing in the Bible, and they have to be educated for that. But they have no mandate to make politics in there, and that is the basic problem what David had told you, that they don't follow their beliefs. They make politics because basically what is the big aim a cardinal has, ladies and gentlemen? It's becoming Pope himself, and therefore he is looking for coalitions, and therefore he's not going, and therefore he has a material interest in deciding, and a material interest in politics to gain even more power, and maybe to become Pope once, or to have a lot of other nice things that you get when you are a cardinal. Thank you. And then you said And we simply don't believe that a pope would make popular decisions at all, because populistic decisions always occur when you have a re-election constraint, ladies and gentlemen. But a pope is not re-elected, he's only elected once. So once he's elected, and when he's the right one, he will do good things for the church, because he is the right one chosen, which David pointed out. So let's take the power of, let's not decide the cardinals. And then let's look a bit back in the Bible where the cardinals come from. And they're not in there. They proclaim that they are the followers of the apostles. Nowhere in the Bible is written down that they should be followers of the apostles, which is a central which distinguished them from the Pope. So basically, their power comes from the power they got in history, and they also have the theological power to say, well, we make a dogma or something like that, and and tell the people that we are important and we are the ones that choose the Pope. It's nowhere written down. So basically, Jesus, ladies and gentlemen, came down to earth to the poor, not to the rich and not to the mighty. And he came down to tell them about God, and that God loves the people. So basically, and that's also what David pointed out, because God loves the people and he's almighty, that means he will not force them to do what he wants. When he would force them, he would show how almighty he is, and we all would start worshiping him because we are afraid of him. But since God loves the people and wants us to be free, he doesn't do that. So he is in our hearts and he works through our hearts and our minds. And it might be that the cardinals, with heavy interest in material things, this process is a little bit biased to the world we live in and not to the world we're going through when we're dying. And we think cardinals are simply corrupted by materials, by coalitions and by politics, and this is why we should take them away. And ladies and gentlemen, even if the government would be right, and cardinals are very integer persons who follow God's will, why do we need so many of them when they do what God wants? We think they do not what God wants, and that is the central problem. Well, basically, ladies and gentlemen, is this a Protestant speech like Closing Gov wanted to tell us? No, it is not. Protestants do not have a pope. They don't want a pope, but Catholics want one. And that is enough for centralization. It is not the centralization that is on stake here. It's how we decide who becomes the most central person of the church. And we think it should be someone that is integer and that is very close to what God wants and who tells the people what God wants. So we should find a way to vote the Pope that makes sure that he is close to God's will as it can be. The cardinals have proven through centuries of intrigues, of campaigns, of politicians, that it's for them not about believing, for them it's not about goodwill, for them it's about their material benefits. So let's give the power to vote for the Pope back to those people who have the right to, these other persons, and back to the mighty being that has once given Peter the power, and that was Jesus. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the floor. The other teams of this debate has either argued from a secular perspective or argued from a non-Catholic perspective. So it's therefore weird that you have two Jews standing in the heart of the Roman Empire, on the Holy Roman Empire, teaching you a bit about Catholicism and promoting Catholic ideals. And what we have told you is that supreme papal authority is not derived from a mandate from the masses, but rather from the Holy Cardinal Conclave, which ends with white smoke. So what will I bring you today? I will bring you basically an analysis of how this will affect the legitimacy of the Pope and of the Church. I will sum this up with 2 points of analysis. Firstly, I'll analyze it through the prism of faith, which is the people who will be voting for this are the faithful, and therefore I think that this is the tantamount, the most important aspect we need to analyze it from. And secondly, I'll do the secular analysis that was that went throughout this debate as well. So, but before that, I have a few points of rebuttal. Now, firstly, I want to tell you that democracy, as they think is so great, works in the realm of men, where it's man's interest that is supposed to be protected. However, it does not work in the realm of God, where it's God's will that is supposed to come out. So that's not what we want to see at all. Now, secondly, they have this idea, they have completely the wrong idea of what a priest actually is. Now, in Protestantism, a priest might be a Bible teacher who basically knows the Bible better than you, who can teach you about Christian values. Whereas in Catholicism, he's an interlocutor. He's closer to God than you are. He's on a spiritually higher level than you are, and that is why he has greater power than you. And in addition to that, if as government seem to believe, all people are equally close to God, then why on earth do we need a pope at all? We asked them this in POIs, they still haven't answered us this. And fourthly, last piece of rebuttal. Now, the Second Vatican Council was basically a reinterpretation which allowed the Bible to be translated into different language. This ripped apart the church, in which case the people lost a lot of faith, and the Catholic Church lost a lot of power. Now, this will be even worse in this case, considering the fact that you're actually alienating the people who vote for the wrong pope, as well as the church being less centralized and thereby having less power to keep people together. Okay, now to my first point, an analysis through faith. No, thank you. Now, basically what we say is that the role of the pope is to be God's representative on earth to the people. And as we say, and if we believe that the people know best, then we don't need a pope at all. But what we say, like government has come up to us and said that, well, you know, this will make people feel more connected to the pope because they have an influence in who becomes the pope, and they can influence what issues the pope should care about. And we'll have a representative with a similar interest. But we say that that is not the case at all, because these are not necessarily people looking for someone to represent them. These are people looking for someone to lead them. They're looking to uphold the central tenets of Catholicism. And in that central tenets of Catholicism is that you need someone who is holier than thou, someone who stands closer to God than you does, because that is the way it worked. Jesus gave the keys to Saint Peter. Jesus had the apostles closer to him. And we have a system in which it is accepted within Catholicism, in which it is accepted by the Catholic faithful that the cardinals are holier than them, that they are closer to God. So what we say is that it doesn't matter on which basis the cardinal chooses the next pope. But what really matters is the process in which it's happened, the ritual that gives the faithful something to believe in, the ritual which happens where they sit in the room with the black smoke coming out until they have reached a consensus decision which is in line with the will of God. And that is what actually matters here. Because otherwise, if we're taking away the cardinals for this, if we're putting the power of interpretation into the hand of each and every person, what essentially we're doing is that we're creating some sort of quasi-centralized Protestantism, which Alon already showed you will not work. Now, Alon also brought you the idea that there's a hierarchy in the closest to God. You have the Pope, you have the Cardinals, you have the Vatican Council, and you have the bishops, and you have the different levels of priests, within Catholicism, who all have different levels, who all defer to the higher authority. So what we have to say here is how this upkeep people's faith in the system of Catholicism. So how will this really harm the faith in Catholicism? And this is where we get into, what about the people who didn't vote for this Pope? Now, as Alon showed you, they will either doubt their own connection with God and say that, okay, maybe I am not as holy as I thought I was, maybe I know wrong, or even worse, they will doubt the legitimacy of the Pope himself. They'll say that this Pope is not a legitimate Pope because because I'm close to God, God speaks to me, so I should know who the better Pope is. So we say here is that we're actually creating a rift in the church, between the church and its own people, where we're actually actively harming people's faith. I'll take opening.
Into Catholicism, is it more important for the Pope to be all-powerful or people to have accessibility to its morals and values?
We say that it's more important for the Pope to be all-powerful, Because the representative of God on earth needs to be able to carry out the will of God. That is the basic tenet of Catholicism. We do not want, if people have a closer relation to the morals, but these morals are given by someone who's not the representative of God in my eyes because I tended to vote for someone else, we think that this is really, really bad. This actually harms your faith in the entire system. So what I've shown you now is that this actively harms people's faith, how this actually removes the need for a pope whatsoever. Now I'm going to do a quick analysis through some secular logic. Now what the first opposition brought to us is that the Cardinals know better. They might know better what is actually needed to run a church, because a church is a powerful bureaucratic aspect. But Alon actually showed you more how this affects how the church will interact with people, because this will cause a necessary decentralization. Because when you go out for the elections, when you go out in this election campaign, you'll have to interact with the local priests because they're the masters of their own flock. So you'll have to do more pandering. You'll have to be more populist in your positions. So what we'll see here is that the Pope will be seen more as a politician. He'll become basically another contestant in American Idol, which actually sullies the entire process, making people see that this is no longer a holy process. This is actually just a farcical process, and this will actually remove legitimacy from the Pope on a secular level as well. And why is this particularly harmful? Because the Pope actually does something good. Alon brought in, for example, when he mediated in Northern Ireland. Now, if the next Pope wants to get more Irish votes, the bishop wants to get more Irish votes, he might not act against them. And this is the same thing we see in conflict areas such as Latin America, that you're more likely to act in line with what people want rather than what is actually the better for peace and the better will of God, because this will get you more votes. So what have we shown you today? Firstly, we have shown you that that this is not in line with Catholicism. And secondly, we have shown you that this will actually reduce the influence of the church. And for these reasons, we beg you to oppose. Thank you very much.